Hey, what is up guys? This is Nishi from MST.TV here, back with another Market Watch episode. Today we're talking about some things that we are seeing on the market because of the new format that we've just entered. So of course we had our first weekend with Cyberstorm access being legal, and it has proven to be one of the most impactful core sets that we've seen in quite a while. Super Heavy Samurais, Pearly, and Gold Pride are all really valid strategies, and while Kashtira is still running around, as well as Branded and Runic taking several top spots as well, the new decks are taking up a decent chunk of the top spots at regionals and stuff like that. On top of that, we should have a ban list right around the corner, which should hit several of the older decks and make even more room for the new strategies, and we will likely see even more price jumps following that. But for now, we're sticking with the changes that have already hit the market, so let's get started. So first up, we're just talking about one card from Cyberstorm Access today, and that is Gold Pride Rollerballer. Rollerballer is of course the level 5 main deck monster for the Gold Pride strategy, and it is one of the deck's most important pieces because it allows you to fusion summon a Gold Pride monster as a quick effect while this card is on the field. Now because of the way that the fusion monster can eat up other monsters, Rollerballer is one of the most important interruptions for you to keep in mind. So on release, Rollerballer was pretty cheap, and we were seeing the card down at around the $10 mark. It did look like the card was going to continue its downward trend. A lot of Gold Pride decks only ran one copy of Rollerballer early on, so although the card looked good, it seemed unnecessary to pick up multiples. However, I think a couple of things happened. One, there were several Gold Pride lists that topped a couple of regionals or so, running multiple copies of Rollerballer, suggesting that players should be running multiple copies. And two, players maybe realized that Gold Pride is a lot better than many people thought they would be, so they felt it was necessary to go and grab the cards now in fear of what might happen after the upcoming ban list. Because of that, Rollerballer is now up around the $15 to $17 mark, which is a pretty decent jump from where it looked like the card was heading down to. Of course, the price of this card is going to largely depend on how the ban list affects the other decks this upcoming format, but if you're expecting the deck to be good next format, it might just be worth picking up your playset now, just to be on the safe side. Since we are talking about Gold Pride, I guess the next card we should look at is Psychic and Punisher. This card is a generic level 11 Synchro monster that came out back in Dimension Force, and honestly it's kind of crazy. Now if your life points are lower than or equal to your opponent's, this card is unaffected by your opponent's activated effects. In Gold Pride Punk, this is fairly easy to meet, unless you're playing against something like Dinomorphia, because the Gold Pride and the Punk cards both require you to lose life points. Now this card also lets you pay 1,000 life points to banish an opponent's card and a monster that you control, and it can also gain attack points equal to the difference between you and your opponent's life points. Now I think the really cool thing is that the banish effect requires you to pay life points to use the effect of a psychic monster, so if you have the Punk field spell up, you do get to draw a card as well. But this card is really good in Gold Pride Punk. I think Tom runs 2 copies in his build, since the immunity makes it a really big wall that's difficult to break, while it can also help you to end games on its own by attacking for game. Overall, this card is really cool. It feels like it's an older card, but it was just printed in Dimension Force, so nothing too crazy. The card does fall in the reprint range of the 2023 Megatins, so we should expect to see it there. With a lot of other secret rare generic synchros like Ruddy Rose Dragon and Borreload Savage Dragon, they didn't get their first reprint until the Megatins, and I think that the same thing happens here with Psychic and Punisher. For now, the card is at $30, which is up a decent bit. I think this card was at $20 for the longest time. You should probably grab a copy or two of this card if you're planning to play Gold Pride Punk, since I could definitely see the deck being top tier, and this being one of the existing cards that will shoot up in price because it's such a key piece of the extra deck if the deck becomes meta relevant. Alright, the next card we're looking at is more generic. It is Kurikara Div Incarnate. So I think we should all know about what this card is already. It has been a very popular card ever since the release of the new Kashtira stuff from Photon Hypernova. Kurikara lets you tribute all monsters on your opponent's field that activated their effects on the field this turn. Against Kashtira, this was devastating, since you could tribute off a Shangri-Ira that had special summoned a monster during the standby phase, as well as an Arise Heart that had attached a material from the Banish Zone, and maybe even other things depending on your opponent's board. It was just a free way to get rid of multiple problem cards. So before, this card was around $30 to $35, and this is while it was really good against what was arguably the best deck of the format. Now, however, after this past weekend, Kurikara has shot up to between $55 and $60 per copy, with plenty of sold listings around that area. I think that what caused it to go up is people realizing that the card would still be good in this upcoming format, even if Kashtira were to be hit on the ban list. It's able to deal with X-Pearly Noir, which is the Pearly boss monster that's really difficult to get rid of, and it can get rid of various pieces of the super heavy samurai end boards depending on what your opponent decides to put together. I think that even with the ban list, Kashtira will still be a really good deck next format, so Kurikara is going to be a really solid going second card against at least 3 top tier decks. Now, we aren't expecting Kurikara to be reprinted until the 2023 Megatins, but at the same time, I could actually see Kurikara being reprinted earlier because of how it's so generic, and it's good against the decks that are part of the meta right now, so I could definitely see Konami reprinting it so that more players could have access to it going into National Season. It's certainly an interesting card, and while I don't think that the $60 price tag is completely sustainable, I'm expecting it to stay pretty steady around the $45 to $50 mark, as long as those 3 decks that we talked about are still in the format. Up next is another generic card, this time it's Excel Synchro Stardust Dragon. I think that we've talked about this card a couple of times on Market Watch before. I don't think that too many people would be caught off guard seeing how expensive this card has gotten recently. Excel is a generic level 8 Synchro monster that lets you revive a level 2 tuner monster from out of your graveyard. This card is actually really crazy right now, particularly because of how popular Cyframe Gear Gamma is. Gamma is extremely important because of cards like Droll and Lockbird and Dimension Shifter. For instance, super heavy samurais can't really play through a Droll and Lockbird, so they need to have access to Gamma to try to negate Droll wherever possible. This has resulted in players even running something like Cyframe Lambda so that they can resolve Gamma while they have monsters on the field and negate the Droll and Lockbird. Of course, this simply means that you can use the Gamma and Driver to go into Excel Stardust, revive the Gamma, and then make a Baron de Fleur. So rather than getting hit by the hand trap, you're negating the hand trap, and the deck also gets to add a free Baron out of it instead, which just makes their end board that much scarier. Now, while Excel Synchro was only $15 on its initial release, the card has steadily climbed in price. A month or so ago, it was at $30, but now the card is up to a whole $50 per copy, which is honestly kind of crazy. However, it should make sense. There's not a lot of value to be found in Maze of Memories aside from Excel Stardust and Baron de Fleur. Sure, a lot of cards are cool or useful, but there's not much in terms of dollar value, so it's only natural that those cards that were expensive go up a little bit more, with not very many people being inclined to open up the product, and the overall supply being lower than expected. This is definitely a card that you guys should own if you are expecting to play competitive Yu-Gi-Oh! This format. I'm not expecting it to go up too much more from here. Maybe I could see it hitting 60 if it really becomes like such a staple card, but it's a brand new and extremely generic and useful card, so I'm not expecting it to go down at all either. The next card we have is Therion King Regulus, and I think it's about time that the card saw the meta play that it deserved. I think it was last year that we all thought that this card was really crazy. It was one of the most expensive cards to come out of Dimension Force, and everyone was really hyped up for Punk Therion based on how popular it was over in the OCG. The card didn't do too well here though. Players instead looked more towards the whole Adventurer token, Tenyi, Punk, Rose Dragon deck, and Regulus kind of fell off. So for a while, Regulus was actually quite cheap. I believe it was somewhere around the $30 to $40 range. However, the card is actually still really strong, and it was only a matter of time before we found something that would be able to abuse it. Therion is a monster that lets you target a Therion or machine in your graveyard, you special summon this card and then equip the target to this card, and then now you have a walking Omni Negate on your board where you can negate any activated card or effect by sending a Therion monster from your hand or field to the graveyard. Now, it just so happens that the super heavy samurais are mostly machines, so it's really easy to summon out Regulus, and then you can also search Regulus out with something like Champion Sargus. So yeah, Regulus is a very important card for super heavy samurais, being a free special summon that you can drop to help protect you from Nibiru, or something that you can just throw down and add to one of your end boards for free. Now, even though Regulus is just a one-of, the card has surged in price recently, and it now sits between $60 and $65 per copy. This is another card that likely doesn't get reprinted until the 2023 Megatins, but honestly, I think it depends on how the next couple of ban lists will go. The super heavy samurais were printed in lower rarities, so I think that there's a chance that we could see some hits to the deck earlier than expected, but even a nerfed version of the deck will still be pretty strong, so overall I am expecting Regulus to stay steady between the $50 and $60 mark for the next several months, leading up to its eventual reprint in September. Next up is another notable card that wasn't as crazy before. It is Blazing Cartesia. So prior to this weekend, Branded was still running Cartesia, usually at 1 or 2. The card is actually really solid for Branded decks, as it grants you the ability to fusion summon even when your Branded fusion inevitably gets hit by Ash Blossom. Now early on it seemed like Cartesia wouldn't see much play, but as the Branded deck evolved, people slowly added in copies, and I think that most builds that I've seen currently run 2 copies of Cartesia. Now over the past weekend, this deck definitely showed off what it could do, despite not doing quite as well in general as Kashtira or Super Heavy Samurais. The new support for Branded in Cyberstorm Access helps the deck to build some pretty scary end boards, and so I think players are looking to pick up their Branded Despia decks sooner. We have Ulti Branded Fusion coming in the next OTS tournament pack, so that card most likely isn't getting hit, and from all the banlist predictions that I've seen, it seems that a lot of players aren't expecting many hits to Branded outside of the banning of Expulsion, so it's possible that the deck will be really strong and go through the next list completely untouched. So after this past weekend, Blazing Cartesia has shot up from being $40 to now being between $55 and $60, so an almost 50% increase in price on a $40 card, which is really significant. Much like a lot of cards in today's video, this card should be reprinted in this year's Megatins, but also just like other cards that might be too late depending on how the next format or 2 shapes up. I think that if you're on Branded, you kind of have to run this card now, but if you aren't on Branded, you should probably look to offload this card in the fairly near future. Even if Branded is a top tier contender going into next format, I don't think that Blazing Cartesia has very much room to go up in price because the Branded deck still has to compete with other decks like Kashtira and Super Heavy Samurais, so Branded won't be able to take up as much of the format as some people might expect. And finally, the last card I want to touch on is Spellbound. Now this is a quick play spell card out of Darkwing Blast that is actually a TCG exclusive. I remember when Tom and I opened up Darkwing Blast and saw this card for the first time, we thought it was just going to be so crazy because it restricted all different forms of summoning for all the monsters that your opponent had on the field. However, the card says all face-up monsters that your opponent currently controls, so it's actually pretty limited in terms of its application. Your opponent could simply extend and summon other monsters out and then make whatever they want that way. However, it seems that Spellbound is getting a little bit of attention because of its applications this format specifically. The first is against Pearly, where you can chain it to the Pearly trap card and prevent them from going into their bigger monster. The other thing is that you can actually chain this to Branded in red, and while they do still get to add a monster back to their hand, they can't go into Guardian Chimera because they can no longer fuse with a monster on the field. So it forces them to either not fusion summon or make an awkward fusion using just monsters from their hand. Kind of a neat card, though of course it depends on how afraid you are of Pearly and Branded, as opposed to decks like Kashtira or Super Heavy Samurais. Maybe Spellbound isn't necessary for everybody to be using when there are other bigger threats this format. But yeah, this is a fairly new card from Darkwing Blast. It always had a lot of potential, I think, and so for a while the card did stay at around like the $5 mark. Now, however, the card is up to $10 per copy, with players still unsure of if they should be picking the card up and if it'll actually be good this format. The card is interesting, so I think it's not a horrible pickup if you can grab a set for around $20, but due to how specific it is and how limited its applications are, I would avoid investing into too many copies of it, despite it being a relatively cheap secret rare. Alright guys, that is it for today's Market Watch episode. There are some pretty cool changes that we are currently seeing, and Cyberstorm Access has only been tournament legal for a couple of days. It'll definitely be interesting to see how it continues to change things, but of course keep in mind that there is also a ban list due that is sure to shake things up as well. Anyways guys, if you did enjoy today's episode, please make sure that you hit that thumbs up button for me. Also make sure you leave a comment in the comment section down below. Let me know what you guys think about today's cards, and let me know what other cards are trending on the market so I can cover them in future episodes as well. Also, if you haven't already, do make sure that you hit that subscribe button to get all of the latest and greatest content from both Tombox and myself. And until next time guys, don't forget to hold on to your MST.TV.